Welcome everybody. It's great to be here and great to be together. My name is Michael Movitz, the co-founder of Brandjectory. I'm happy to be here with my co-founding partners, Tom Malengo and Susan Bryanton. And we're very excited to be hosting an awesome panel today, moderated by another awesome person, about the adult beverage industry. I will be introducing them momentarily, but for those of you who may not be familiar with Brandjectory, I'll just take a second for a quick introduction. Brandjectory is a platform that helps to connect CPG founders and CPG investors, and we help those founders prepare for and navigate the capital raise process. We use both a combination of online technology and offline facilitated virtual meetings. We are focused on CPG seed to Series A, and we do not take a commission or a success fee as part of the transaction. We are strictly a simple annual subscription model. We've got 120 brands and over 600 investors in the network right now. And if you have any questions at any point, feel free to reach out to myself or to my partner, Tom at brandjectory.com or Michael at brandjectory.com. And with that, I'd love to introduce our panel. Joining us today, our moderator will be Farron Selnicker, who is the spirits editor at BevNet. And on our panel today, we have Taylor Foxman, founder and CEO of the Industry Collective, an independent beverage advisory firm. She's also an advisor to beverage alcohol VCs and, quite frankly, a ton more. Giuseppe Infusino is partner and chief investment officer at InvestBev, a fund that invests in the adult beverage sector. We also have Mike Solo, who is a partner at 99 Proof Partners, a firm that organizes and manages investments in the adult beverage alcohol space. And finally, John Berg, who is vice president of thought leadership for the BevAl space at NIQ, which is formerly Nielsen IQ. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Farron, and we look forward to a great conversation. Actually, I'm sorry, I forgot one other thing. We do have Q&A available at the bottom of the screen. If you have a question, feel free to submit it at any point. We will first have the panel for about a half hour, 35, 40 minutes, and then we will move into Q&A. And Farron, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Good to see you all. Let's get started. As Michael said, we're going to talk between ourselves for the first 30 minutes. Feel free to throw questions in and we'll get to them at the end. So I want to start with some of the kind of bigger consumer and market trends that founders should be aware of as they go to market. So John, why don't we start with you? Why don't you tell us about how alcohol consumption and wellness how are these trends impacting innovation, new products in beverage alcohol? And Taylor, you have a number of clients in this area, so please feel free to jump in as well.
Yeah, thanks very much. And thanks for having me on the panel today. It's a fantastic setup. I've been in the beverage alcohol business for about 20 years now, almost all of that on the supplier side, working on commercial insights. And I have to tell you that I mean, not only is the environment dynamic, but shoppers more than ever before are really looking for that friction-free purchasing environment. And so this omni-channel that's been a kind of a buzzword for quite a while is really coming to fruition. And so what shoppers are expecting in the BevAl space is that they can get their products where they want, when they want, and in a manner and in a pricing that they're looking for. The other mission critical area that's really come to the forefront is product and content transparency. And there's this focus on the ingredients and having that transparency to what it is that I'm drinking. And it's really starting to test brand loyalty. You know, brand loyalties that have been in place for a long time. People are picking up packages and looking at them and really making distinct choices from what they see. And the last area I'll touch on is the whole area around ESG. The consumer is really looking for products that have a focus on either being eco-friendly, responsibly sourced, making sure that the way that product got to them was something that they feel really good about. And the investment community is watching this too, because investment community, especially if they're really focused on ESG standards and strategies, it's something that they want to put their money behind when, or knowing, I should say, that consumers are going to be really focused on that. And I'll pass it over to Taylor for some comments on this too.
No, thank you all for having me. Yeah, no, I agree with everything John said. I mean, the only other things I can really think of off the top of my head is just taking kind of a step back at like the macro landscape. I think of what's happening. I mean, at the end of the day, it's from a consumer lens. I always say it's like the most exciting moment in time because, you know, there is more out there for consumers to enjoy than ever before. You can have an adaptogenic water. You can have a cannabis water. You can have a beer. You can have a fake beer. So I think like at a macro level, it's super exciting from a consumer perspective, because I think there's never been more activity happening across beverage. I would say from a supplier side, and even honestly from a lot of the different stakeholders that are on this panel with me, it does, you know, it is now a very highly saturated moment in time too, right? So it's kind of from a consumer lens, it's really exciting. And even from, you know, the supplier perspective, it's great. But, you know, looking at it just at a high level, the stakes are higher. There's more competition. There's more saturation in the market. So the need to really, this won't be the last time I say it, but figure out your so what and your unique differentiators, I think is more so important than ever before. And then Farron, you had alluded to, and I know John had talked about it, but, you know, this kind of wider discussion around better for you. Obviously that's, you know, kind of this umbrella term, and there's a lot of ways that you could take it. But I am seeing, you know, so many more brands coming to market, obviously, than ever before in the past year and a half within the non-alc, low-alc space. And it's a really exciting time. My take, anyone that knows me or works with me, is that whether or not you drink the Kool-Aid and you like any of the things going on in this low, no-alc category, one is you can't knock the sales. There are sales to back up the fact that people are consuming these products. And two is optionality. I'm excited most for the ability for people, and Farron, we talked about this last week when we caught up and had fake Negronis, just the ability to have more options. So those would be the two kind of bigger additional trends I'm seeing.
Those are great, thanks. And John, I'd love for you to touch on, I feel like Jerry Seinfeld when I ask these kind of questions, but like, what's up with Gen Z? I think we're seeing, you know, them driving a lot of these trends. They seem like they're not loyal, they're drinking less. Can you talk more about how founders should think about reaching that group?
Yeah, and it's one of the 6 pillars that we talk about for 23 and beyond. And that has to do with recruitment. And for Gen Z, the LDA portion of Gen Z is about 21 to 24 years old right now. And we've done a lot of work on understanding Gen Z in general, but especially on the beverage alcohol side. And, you know, I thought Taylor brought up a really good point about the non-alcohol space. And one of the things that we're seeing with Gen Z, but at a broader sense, with all beverage alcohol consumers, is 82% of the consumption on that non-alc side is coming from people who also consume alcohol. And so what's unique about that, and the way you'd pin that together, is especially for Gen Zs, it's making sure that they're moderating their intake, in some cases, moderating their intake, but also they're very focused on their social media presence. And so they don't want to see themselves in a way that they aren't particularly happy with, in terms of how they look on social media. So I'll let you connect the dots on that, but it's been a really important understanding of Gen Z. But 45% of Gen Z are telling us in that LDA space anyway, they do not consume alcohol at all. So what does that mean? That just means that that recruitment, I think, at this particular point, needs to consider that at the top of the brand funnel. So when you're thinking about how big your market can be for your product, you really have to put that lens up near the top, knowing that you're only going to get a portion of not only Gen Z, but also from some of the rest of the cohorts.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Another trend that I want to touch on quickly is premiumization, which has been on the rise for a few years. And so what are you seeing in terms of the impact of inflation on premiumization strategy?
Yeah, for inflation, I think everybody knows now, I mean, we're running right around 6%, food and housing indexing just a little bit higher than that. But beverage alcohol had been running below that, sort of played a little bit of a catch-up game. And spirits is still running about a +2. Malt-based products are running about a +7, driven by beer and some of the beer price increases that we saw. However, the inflation impact in the on-premise has been a little bit different. It had been fairly high. It's running right around 7%, but it is something that we watch on a regular basis. But so far, there's 2 points I was going to bring up with this. One is on premiumization, especially in the spirit side, we've not seen any deterioration at all. So premiumization runs about 68 to 72% of the spirits category. In beer, of course, on the import side, you've got really prolific increases. And with RTDs now, a lot of them have moved to the spirits-based cocktails. We're seeing premiumization there. All of this to say, one of the core consumer components for premiumization is what we call the split brain budget. And that is that consumer mindset that, you know what, I've had to kind of negotiate my way through every purchase I've made. But for beverage alcohol, you know what, I'm going to stop it here. I'm going to have that luxury indulgence, and I'm going to have the product that really suits this moment that I need to have with all the other, savings that I've had to do.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, let's widen that out. How are economic conditions impacting brand growth from a revenue and a funding perspective this year? I'm going to hand this one to Mike and Giuseppe.
Yeah, I'm happy to hop in there. The fundraising side of it is an interesting one, and I think founders who are very kind of focused on their particular world, right, their particular product, need to pull back the view a little bit and kind of scale it back and say, like, how does funding even happen, right? And so funding, the economy and inflation impacts people's wealth, right? And so, or their perceived wealth at the very least, right? And so their wealth impacts their investment decisions. And that means either directly into a company or into a venture or private equity fund. And so when they feel poorer, right, relatively less wealthy, they make fewer investments directly or indirectly. And so then that translates to folks that are trying to raise funds, and it's harder for them to raise capital, thereby less dry powder. And so that impacts the fundraising environment in a big way, right? In terms of the dry powder out there, well, a lot of it pushes competitive nature, deals move faster, pricing goes up. And when that dry powder kind of evaporates or melts, right, then deal speed slows down and pricing comes down. And so the expectation of a founder needs to align with that, and also how they're managing their business needs to align to that, right? And so if they are thinking, I was planning on raising money, $3 million by June 2023, and now the fundraising environment has slowed dramatically, they were going to raise in June because of where they plan to be from a cash burn perspective. But now if they can't raise until the end of the year, they need to start looking at their cash burn now as the rest of the year kind of plays itself out, and that might take longer to raise. So definitely very impactful from the fundraising side. And I don't know, Mike, you can add on or take the brand side more deeply.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I'll start with the brand side first. It's important to have a good cash strategy in times like this. And there's lots of different places to get funding, outside of just the traditional equity raise. And so it's important that brands are open to at least considering something like debt or, something else that, can give you a little bit more of what Giuseppe was referencing, that dry powder, that expansion capital. Just to give you a for instance, if you're moving from a couple of states distribution footprint, maybe things are going well, your distributors, trying to hit the gas pedal, and you need to now penetrate a 4, 5, 6 state distribution footprint. That's an expensive proposition, and there's also a timeline associated with that. So, it takes time to raise capital. It takes more time now than it has, in recent times at least. And so, again, it's just important to have, a really good, well thought out cash management strategy, and then have some additional resources available to you outside of just the traditional, let's go out and raise money, or, find some doctors to put some money in. So, so we certainly, at least in our business, we certainly see that happening more and more often. And the founders who have done a lot of research are pretty successful. They extend their runway considerably, and it's it's not as bad of a deal as people let on. But the folks who are really just wholly reliant upon going out and doing a priced round, if it takes you 6 months longer than you forecasted, then things can get pretty thin. So that's definitely something. And I think along the lines, maybe just to tag on to what Giuseppe was saying earlier on the investor end of things, just kind of something to consider when you kind of refer to the temperature in the room. So a lot of people out there are going to be pitching or are pitching to investors. It's important to understand that kind of a subplot to the economic condition is that a lot of investors are losing their, let's say, stomach for having a captive investment that's going to be 5, 6, 7, 8 years of brand growth before there's a proposed exit. And so it's just important to understand that that's what you're up against. You're up against, perhaps they're a lot more hesitant to tie up as much money in something that's going to be captive for that period of time. And there's also a lot of options out there with the drying up of some of the VC money out there. A lot of the investments that are being proposed to investors that have a pretty good amount of money to deploy are promising higher returns. And so it's important to just kind of keep that in the back of your mind and use that, in my opinion, use that as fuel to create a more well thought out plan and and to actually be able to deliver on those tactics.
Wow, super helpful, guys. Speaking of well thought out plans, one thing that we had a huddle before we got on this webinar, and one thing that came up that I thought was really interesting is, as brands kind of choose what paths to take when pursuing a product and how to align it for growth, what challenges should they be thinking about? So for example, if a company decides to, say, launch a completely unique product, what should they be thinking about in terms of the challenges they'll face versus a company that, say, launches a product in like a very crowded segment or category? Giuseppe, if you want to take that, go ahead, but all of you are welcome to. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it's actually super topical of a question, because we have our outside of our equity fund, we have an accelerator that its cohort is going on as we speak right now. And I spoke to this earlier today. We talked about this point. And so, right, you have like blue ocean versus white space, right? And so if you, in the blue ocean, you're something completely novel and something no one's ever heard of, there's pros and cons, right? The pro is that I think you have a little bit more latitude and runway to learn as you go, right? There's a little bit more flexibility because there's not as many kind of sharp elbows around you to compete, and that you can kind of, you have more time to kind of figure it out and lock into product market fit. But it's a very steep learning curve with consumers. It's a very steep learning curve with distributors and retailers because they don't know how to use it, when to use it, what context. So it's a long road, and it is steep, but you have the ability to kind of learn as you go. On the other side of it, to kind of get into that white space, you need to be incredibly laser focused to hit that point of differentiation positioning that is, kind of silences the noise of all of those things, all of their products in that subcategory. So you need to do something that's just completely, or not completely different, but like substantially different and better than your peer set. And you need to have that early and have that just drilled in, I guess, very quickly in my mind. If you do that and you can hit that, you can take advantage of a white space in a growing category, right? You can find a way to play into tequila in a differentiated way. There's a lot of tailwinds there, but it's very competitive. So harder, slower for novel, and but ability to have more mistakes as you go. You move faster, but very competitive, and you need to be very, very kind of buttoned up on the white space kind of side of things.
Yeah, great. Does anyone want to add anything to that?
I would just say, like, just to give a case study, I've been with a brand for about 4 years, and they're a canned cocktail company. And when they got into this space, they were one of a few, and now they're not. And what's been their driving differentiator is like an IP on the bottle. And you think to yourself, okay, well, is that really that much of a differentiator? Well, as things get, going back to my point before, like more and more saturated, just to Giuseppe's point, like whatever path you take, that's fine. But figure out what that is sooner than later. And so for them, they have been able to continue to generate sales and, be able to secure capital and find corporate partners on the M&A side and the corporate M&A side, primarily driven by that one IP on the bottle. They have a good product, but for me, that's a good case study of like really figuring out if you are going to go the path of something that's unique. I think that's an interesting actually hybrid, right? Because it's like they are in a bigger kind of concentrated space of like canned cocktails, which is a lot of people have canned cocktails, a lot of people have an RTD format, but they found something that is specifically ownable to them. And I think as they get further down the road, if they get sold, which I think they will, that quite frankly, I think is what is going to be the reason they're sold. So you don't have to think macro, you can think micro. And in that case, it was a micro example of not micro. I mean, they spent 5 years waiting to get that license, but when they got it, they're like, all right, I have something that's a bit different. And so anyway, I just use that as an example of, a best practice in really figuring out, to Giuseppe's point, what lane you want to play in. But even if you go on the side of doing something that's ownable to you, just be very clear on what that is and how you're different. And if you can get some form of an IP or a patent or something that's like tangibly differentiated, hone in on that, because I think it's helpful.
Yeah.
And just to build on Taylor's point, I think that's spot on. You have to have that compelling story. And while you may be able to tell that story really well, that story has to be repeatable from a distributor standpoint and from a retailer standpoint as well, because if there's going to be objections along the way from the distributor or retail community, you have to be able to address those and not brush them under the carpet. So we see over and over again, especially with the new items that we track into the systems, that exactly what Taylor's talking about is spot on. but it has to flow all the way through the 3-tier system in the way that you've got it designed or set up.
Great addition.
I'll take the blue ocean piece real quickly. From you know, I speak to a lot of brands, right? And so I end up just kind of going back to this piece, having a really clear mindset as far as what it's going to take to convince a consumer to engage both with your product and with your brand is enormous. Especially, I mean, it's big everywhere, but especially in the blue ocean side. So, you know, case in point, we made investment very early on in the non-out segment. So to build on what Taylor brought up early, and they were, I would say, artful about how they understood what was going to happen if and when they finally broke through into retail. There was a massive, overcomable, but a massive education piece that went along with the sales process for what they were selling. It was a new fledgling category, and there had been, you know, plenty of press paid attention to it, but there was really only like 1 or 2 competitors in it. And so I'm sure for anybody that's in the beverage space, saying 1 or 2 competitors is like, oh my God, that would be amazing. But the problem that they ran into is nobody knew what to do with it. So they would pick it up and they'd put it back down, right? And so you've got to learn how to communicate very clearly what your, not just what your value proposition is, but how to, in a positive way, how to teach these people how to engage with the product once they get it home. And, you know, you don't have a tasting crew there, or, you know, any type of print material, or if they do have print material that accompanies the purchase, then, you know, it's got to be the right kind of stuff that, you know, people can digest quickly and use, put it right onto the field, and, you know, create, if it's a cocktail that they're creating, something that's, you know, fun and engaging and that they want to show to their friends, and all of those things that get them to continue to keep the top off the bottle. And so it's very important to have that piece of the go-to-market strategy nailed down, and mentally, you know, to be prepared for the amount of push it's going to take.
Right. This is so helpful and such a great lead in for the next question, which we've kind of covered a little bit, but is there anything you want to add about how companies can develop their, as Taylor mentioned earlier, their so what, so their value proposition, not just to retailers, but also to like media, to investors? What are companies getting right? What are the big no-nos? This one is for all of you guys.
I'll just say one more thing, which is just building on that, is just like, think about like your stakeholder a little bit at hand. Like, you know, we were talking about this in kind of the pre-recording, but like generally speaking, no matter what, blue ocean, green ocean, swim, whatever you're doing, you know, you really have to not only think about everything that everyone in this conversation said so far, but realistically, like we were even doing like kind of a mock run with everyone as a panelist. So like if you were to talk to Farron is a notable spirits writer for BevNet, like how you position your so what and like how you talk to Farron is highly different than a conversation with John or with Giuseppe or with Mike. Like, I think that's just really important to keep driving home, which is not that you necessarily need to change like what you think is necessarily different around what you're doing, but like think about the so what for these people. And I think a lot of the people that are listening in are trying to get in front of people like a John or a Farron or a Mike or a Giuseppe. I'm just on the sidelines, which is fun. But so with all of these people, I just think, again, just reiterating the need to just understand a little bit more about what Farron is looking for, and asking these people like, what are you looking for? And what are your, you know, like, what are you focused on for the year? Or like, what are you looking to write about? Or what are you looking to invest in? I think everyone just jumps into, this is my pitch. And that pitch really shouldn't be the same for any of the people that are panelists here. They should, other than Giuseppe and Mike, maybe they can be similar, maybe. But other than that, so I don't know if that's helpful, but I would just drilling down on that is really thinking about the audience and who you're looking to target, and making sure that your messaging just aligns with that person, and really listening to them first, and back ending your strategy based on their needs and what they're looking for in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. Such a great point. I mean, I was saying in the pre-recording that a lot of the what facilitates me, for example, writing about a brand is often that they've kind of asked me what type of stories I cover before they've sent me a press release, for example. So then they know how to tailor that press release for something that we would actually run on BevNet. So that's a great point. And then leading into that, a lot of success, I think, in any industry is about building relationships, right? So how have you guys seen companies build successful relationships, and how do they kind of keep those relationships maintained, keep them cultivated? I think that goes for, you know, any type of relationship that a founder might be having, whether it be media, investor, et cetera. Anyone want to comment on that? Mike?
Yeah, okay. You know, I keep thinking about, you know, things that we see, and would probably just be the same, you know, in our line of work. There's just a lot of pitches going on. There's a lot of products out there these days, and you know, just as crowded as it is on the shelf, it's, you know, it's crowded on my desk right now. You know, there's a lot of activity. And so, you know, here, you know, we try and at least understand that, you know, we maybe to the piece about, you know, what people get right and wrong, you know, in pitching. I can tell you, like, the stuff that stands out for us is not solely about the product, because there are so many products that are, at least until we can taste it, you know, they're doing similar things, right? I mean, premiumization in the RTD category, right? There's a lot of you know, less malt moving into you know, more liquor-based drinks, and you know, like, until we can actually taste it, then you know, you sort of have to put a period on that and move on to the next topic. And that topic just invariably becomes, can this team pull it off? You know, do they have access to the amount of information and the quality of information that it's going to take in order to, you know, generate an appropriate understanding of who their customer is? And if you don't understand who your customer is, then how can you activate them and create brand loyalty? And you know, there's a lot of celebrity or micro celebrity or micro influencer talk, and maybe you know, maybe Taylor's a better one to speak to on this, but we see a ton of that, and that's a big piece of the value proposition of the brand. And in that instance, it's not really about the brand, then it's about the celebrity. So it's almost vapor that you expect the consumer to you know, to latch onto in the market. And so so for us, you know, the very difficult, you know, less quantitative, more qualitative thing that we see is, you know, we have to be able to trust that the founders are resourceful enough to proceed forward and react and execute on their vision, but also, you know, react to things like economic constraints. And you know, perhaps they don't get it right out of the gate, but at least they're creative enough to, you know, adjust, and they know where to go to find the things that it takes in order to, you know, fix the strategy. And so that's, you know, that's a lot about what we're looking for. And you know, there's plenty of folks that really have a hard time talking through that. And so I guess, you know, to the point about, you know, what people get right and wrong when they're talking to folks like us, this is a confidence game. It's a relationship game for sure, as you mentioned, but this is a confidence game. So we've got to be able to trust that you're going to be a, you know, a good fiduciary, you know, on behalf of our investors when we make an investment. And a lot of that is what I'm kind of alluding to.
The only thing I'll add on this is talk about relationships, right? I mean, whether it's dealing with me and Mike on the investor side or anybody, you know, from a media side or whatever, relationships aren't typically built with a one-sided kind of mentality. And so one, it's good to try to build relationships when you don't need anything. That's when you're not asking for something and you're just maybe offering something, or just trying to understand where that person is coming from. So, you know, that takes time and energy, and like managing that as like an actual kind of task of your kind of network. As it relates to investors, is you think about like relating to them and trying to give something to them by thinking like, I think about this all the time, like think like an investor, right? So like if I'm on the other side of the page, or think about it like someone in media or whatever, what is important to them? What are they thinking about? And how can I kind of react to that or prepare for that? And so one of the suggestions I give to brands as they think about talking to investors is, if you were looking at this, what would you see if you're honest with yourself? What are the risks associated with this? And what steps are you taking to mitigate those risks? And it kind of goes to the blue ocean white space type of thing, like, because there's risks associated with either of those paths. But what are you doing to mitigate that? Like, you need to be self-aware that those risks are there. And that proves to me that you're thoughtful. And then what are you planning? How are you mitigating those? I don't know, that kind of helps you relate to the investor specifically, and proves kind of the thoughtfulness of your approach and what you're trying to build.
Absolutely. Thanks. I think we have time for one more question before we go to Q&A. So I'd love to hear about, say, once the company gets their product on the shelf, how do successful brands keep consumers coming back? There's a lot of talk about loyalty these days and customers switching categories. So how do these brands keep people coming back to them? John, do you want to kick that off?
It's a wonderful point. I have some good news on that front. It used to be in the beverage alcohol space that people tended to shop and consume in their lanes, and there's no more staying in lanes. As a matter of fact, 52% of the beverage alcohol dollars now come from households that cross over beer, wine, and spirits. And so it's that diversification. And I will tell you that ready to drink has really pushed some of that number most recently. And I think we're going to see more of that going forward. But it's kind of that underpinning that is so important. That's the good news side. On the more challenging side, we have to deal with the fact that, especially in the off-premise, I'll give you a spirits number, 82% of purchases in the off-premise, so that would be, the liquor store, the grocery store, convenience store environment, are pre-planned. And shoppers are spending very little time in store. I mentioned friction-free before. They want that friction-free purchase. We walk into those same stores and spend 20 minutes to an hour because we're so embedded in the category. But the general consumer who has a life to lead wants to get on with that life. And they're doing that by trying to make that purchase decision quickly and efficiently. So that's why the bigger suppliers put so much emphasis into their ATL, into their above the line advertising, and such significant investment, because they know that time is short. Now, on the good news side, with trial in the on-premise, those numbers sort of flip around. So there we have a great opportunity with wait staff and bartenders to get the recommendations that we need to gain that trial. And once we have that trial, we're able to go forward with people looking for that product at retail. So there's the really good news is, like I said, it's wide open, I think, right now. The more difficult news is you got to have that story going in that gets people to buy you off of the shelf without a whole lot of decision at the shelf.
Great, thanks. All right, well, I think we have some good questions here. I am going to start with one from my editor, from Jeff. So Jeff asked, wondering if there's any thoughts here on whether this new move towards total beverage from beers, CSD, and spirits company is something that will create better opportunities for entrepreneurs, or whether the innovators will get boxed out by the big guys. thoughts?
I mean, my thought would be that there's still some pretty good opportunity out there. And I think that, I mean, innovation comes from all different angles. We, for all the reasons that we talked about already, I think that the opportunities are actually going to continue to grow, but from the retail community, we're getting a much more cynical environment. You know, they're seeing 150, 200 new items a week, and they're trying to wade through an SKU rationalization process that's almost unmanageable at this point. So you got to be able to cut through that clutter quickly and efficiently, but there's still, I think, there's still plenty of room for new product innovation.
Cool. Let's see. We also have a question. Here's one from Kyle regarding omni-channel. How much of that consists of online sales and Bev Alc? Is that something that should be taken seriously as a first step for Bev Alc companies, or should retail be the only focus?
Yeah, we track in Omni, we track the online business across all the categories within the store. And I will tell you that beverage alcohol has been running quite a way behind. And the typical reason for that is the consumer need for the product is in direct adjacency to the need for consumption. In other words, I'm buying it very, very close to when I'm going to consume it. I'll give you a quick number. Champagne, for example, is consumed within 6 hours of purchase. So this is not a, buy the package and take it home and let it sit on the shelf and adore it. So
that's me.
Yeah. So the simple facts for e-commerce are I know you can, in some markets, you can get products very quickly in e-commerce, but the simple dynamics here of purchase right in front of consumption lends most people to not opting in for that. It also makes some of the other purchases you might be making online, it makes them a little bit more laborious or complicated, needing to get a signature, etc. So if I was to choose, that would not be a place where I would go exclusively. In other words, not just exclusively online. If you're in the 3-tier system, if you're a non-ALC, that's the whole different story. Then you've got any number of good avenues open to you.
Great.
Hey, Farron, I'm
to
gonna
consider there. I think that's interesting. Is if you're in, we kind of refer to it as like the collector space, but this would be like bourbon as an example. Yeah. I think there's an interesting nuance in e-com that, again, I think to John's point, it's not going to occupy a huge chunk of your sales on an annual basis. Unless you stumble onto something amazing, but it is going to, being in the right outlet, I would say, is going to give people access to your product. Let's say your product is an aged bourbon product and you're predominantly on the East Coast, but, shipping lanes are open to you, in the Midwest or in the West Coast, and you don't have a retail presence there. It can be a smart thing to go ahead and strike a partnership there and dedicate some ad spend towards being featured in that kind of a way to drive some sales, or at least to drive some awareness, and perhaps give yourself a bit of a soft landing when it's time to expand. If you can be strategic about that, then that might make sense, and that might be a way to kind of simplify the e-commerce question a bit.
Hey, Farron, there's about 3 questions here that kind of revolve around the investment space, and I thought maybe we could throw them out all as one to Michael, Giuseppe, and anybody else who wants to jump in. But there's a question here about how do ALC investors look at the alternate ALC space? and Mike had mentioned a little bit about thinking strategically outside of just raising capital, and what are some of those opportunities for young brands in the ALC space to think beyond simple equity raising. And a third question around it was basically, where are the opportunities from both an intro perspective and an investment perspective, where the big bev alc companies aren't going to go. So sort of a three-part question there, but really around, hey, all the things around ALC investors looking at non-ALC, raising outside of capital outside of actual equity, and where do you want to be that the big companies aren't going to look? So I'll throw that one out as one.
Thanks.
Mike, Giuseppe, thoughts?
I'll chime in
How do you
after
want-
they're done. I have small thoughts at the end. I'm not the one to lead this, but I have some secondary thoughts.
Well, I'll let Mike
go ahead,
talk.
Giuseppe.
You brought up the alternative funding, debt and stuff. So I'll let you kind of finish the thread on that, and then I can jump into other stuff.
Yeah. So, Tom, then the question on alternative is how we view it.
How you view it, and where are the opportunities that go beyond equity financing for a young brand?
So I'll take the last part first. There are a lot of debt vehicles that are out there that, could make sense. Obviously, it'll be tough to generalize, not knowing too much about who's in the audience here, but I'll just give you an example. So a good example of what could be similar to a line of credit or for working capital is called barrel financing, and that exists in the aged spirits space, most specifically in bourbon. So it's on a higher level, it's a way to leverage your resting inventory and turn it from something that is maybe accumulating in value, but it's not putting any cash on the field today, and to kind of turn that upside down. So you do have cash to spend on it, and that can be assuming that interest rates don't continue to climb through the ceiling. That can be something that makes sense for a lot of brands, and it does sort of function like a line of credit at a functional level. It's actually pretty similar, and so there are not a lot outside of alcohol. There's not a lot of manufacturing businesses, at least that I've seen from my investment banking career, that don't have a line of credit, and there's just too much need or too difficult to forecast what happens to not at least have some kind of cash reserve that you can draw on for a relatively light penalty, and so you don't have to go out and spend the time and effort to raise capital. So when we evaluate businesses, it's not necessarily a red flag that they don't have one of those, but if it's not part of the consideration, then we almost have to hit this pause button for a second and kind of have a cash management strategy session about how are we going to manage this in the future. It can't be all slash and burn where you raise massive equity rounds and spend it right up to the red line and and then go out and raise again. So that's more or less what I'm alluding to, is that there are debt vehicles that are out there that having something similar to that on station can really be a valuable facilitator of growth. And it's also something, depending on how it's structured and where it came from, that you can go back to time and time again. And so it's you use it, you pay it back, that kind of situation, or you just use chunks of it and it's not sinking the business from an interest rate perspective. And so there's that to consider as well, that it can be fairly flexible.
And then I know part of that question was on the alternative ALC space, correct, Tom? If anyone wants to talk about that.
Maybe if Giuseppe, you want to jump in. I mean, how do alcohol beverage investors look at the ALC space? Do they judge it differently? Look for different things, et cetera?
Yeah. Well, I do appreciate Mike bringing up the going back to his point on the barrel financing. Given we're have $100 million to put to work in that department as of last week. So happy to talk about that at any time. But on the alternative space, I think, we might be a little bit in the minority here. I know Taylor has thoughts on it, and I know I've talked with Mike about these as well. I mean, as I look at alternatives, and John, you might have some thoughts on this as well, right? Like, we're not actively, we're having a hard time building conviction around non-elk, and you're talking about alternatives to elk. We made an investment in cannabis beverage, and I see that as I see consumers, I don't know if consumers want to have, I call it like the share of buzz, right? And like maybe alcohol might lose a little bit of the share of buzz to cannabis, but I don't think the buzz is something that people want less of in what we see, right? And so that's something where I see that maybe consumers shifting to cannabis or other sort of kind of things like that. But like non-elk, I think that's part of the question, right? Like, do we look at non-elk beer and things like that? I think you're gonna have a really hard time, at least the way we look at it, from a velocity perspective, right? On premise, especially. Off premise, I think non-alc beer has done a good job with Athletic, but somebody like that you're seeing them as much as you're seeing them because they're spending a lot of money for you to see them as much as you're seeing them. So that story might not end the way everybody wants it to, right? They need to keep raising money. We talked about raising money in the beginning. So I have a tough time with alc alternatives as an investable category. It's not something we spend a lot of time looking at it, meeting with folks and making sure we're not missing anything, but it's not something that I find incredibly appealing, at least right now.
Taylor, do you want to add your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we have different, I mean, I get it. I fully get it. And there is a huge area of adoption for it too. I work with, still out of all the brands that I advise and the founders, I would say like 70% are still in the traditional alc, but then I work with a considerable amount that are not. And a lot of them do fall within this, the non-alc space in particular. What I will say is like, there are more options outside of like beverage venture for those people, in my opinion, because you can tap a lot of these, whether it's, high net worth who are interested and maybe are abstaining from drinking, or angel groups that are focused on health and wellness, VCs that invest in CPG, better for you products. So I think when we think about like investment opportunities in the traditional bev alc space, yeah, like Giuseppe said, I think it's very much case by case. I don't think like, I won't speak on Mike's behalf, but I think you have to talk to people like Mike and Giuseppe to see what their temperature is on investing in that space. Some are more open to it than others, but I think there is actually a broader area of funding available to the non-alc space in particular right now, because they fit into, I would say, a lot more of these theses that the beverage alcohol brands can't. So if you think about like any type of venture firms that even have pet products, CBD products, beauty products, technically it's fair game for non-alc brands to talk to those different types of people, whereas a beverage brand cannot. So I think, just building on what he said, I think for the beverage specific investors, I think you need to look on their website, talk to them, understand a little bit more about where they sit. Either they're, I hate the word bullish because I'm not a venture capitalist, but I'll say either they're bullish on it or they're not. And if they're not, that's cool. But if they are, then it's, worth talking to them about. And but I do think if you are someone who is in the non-alc space and you're a founder and you are looking for capital, I would think outside of the box here and look at just more of the better for you CPG, health and wellness focused investment opportunities, because I think there are more out there that you could tap that potentially beverage alcohol brands can't.
And I would even argue that they might be more on point for a target audience than Mike or I would be, because they're different, more aligned on distribution channels, retail channels, the consumer side of it. I mean, like, it's very different to how you have to go through the three-tier distribution network and things like that. Like those might be better kind of paths to pursue. Not saying you couldn't go to an alc investor like myself or Mike, but it might make more sense to go with some of the folks Taylor brought up.
I was going to give you a quick build to that, which I loved hearing that discussion. I think that's fantastic. We track characteristics, and so we understand what we call functional beverages and how they're lining up and where they're coming from. And right now they're coming from all over the board. You know, every kind of functional characteristic that you can possibly think of is coming into the marketplace. And while I'm not going to comment on every single one of them, one commonality they have, what we've seen so far anyway, is pretty short product market life cycles. And so what's tend to happen is they get to a maturity phase very quickly. So what I would offer up is, if you are going to come with a functional beverage or a beverage that has some functionality built into it, make sure you understand you may be in for a short product life cycle, and you might want to communicate to a retailer, this is the rest of my plan, this is what comes next, this is the innovation that I'm going to come with as that product life cycle hits the plateau. So it's kind of what we're seeing in the measurements that we're doing.
Great, thanks. Tom, I think our time is up.
Pretty much
right?
at time. I have one quick question, though. We had a couple questions just that kind of went around, and I'm going to try to do this really quickly. If somebody wants to just retail versus, you know, on premise, in the bar, in the restaurant, where's the opportunity? Where there's so much innovation out there, where's really the opportunity? Maybe that's a quick one that maybe John could answer.
Yeah, with all the CGA tracking that we do in the on-premise, and I used to do a lot of on-premise research with bartenders and wait staff. What you're looking at there is really a trial environment, and so what you really need to do is be able to make that translation over to the off-premise. So if you're going to go with the on-premise, you have to go with a plan, and you have to have a plan that's going to involve and not go around the bartenders and the wait staff, because they're very important in that cycle. And like I was talking about with decision making, as a consumer, you're much more open to suggestions and recommendations in the on-premise than anywhere else. It's almost a mirror image of the off-trade.
All right, we are at time. I want to thank Farron, Giuseppe, Taylor, Mike, John for being part of this event. For those who don't know Brandjectory, we have a lot of things planned. We're going to be introducing some new services soon, but everything we do is really designed around bringing founders this kind of expertise. And there's a lot of expertise here on the call. And that's what we really love, is the opportunity to bring that directly to founders, directly to the community. And we really appreciate Farron and BevNet being part of this, and all the folks that are on this. So we thank you. A recording of this call will be made available, and please keep your eyes open on LinkedIn for more of these webinars. And if you have any questions about joining Brandjectory, becoming part of us, and enjoying the fruits of our community, both Michael, myself, Susan would love to hear from you. So we would appreciate that. Just reach out to us on LinkedIn, Tom at Brandjectory, Michael at Brandjectory, and we'll get right back to you. So look for a lot of things coming from Brandjectory, and a thank you again to our staff. Thank you especially to my co-founders, Michael Movitz, and my very special, lovely wife, Susan Bryanton, for being part of bringing this to you. With that, thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and we really appreciate everyone being here.
Thanks.
Bye now.